Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Berachot. We are up to Perek Chet Mishnah Hey. Now, the Mishnah is going to discuss another machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel regarding a specific situation. We know that when upon Shabbat ending, we recite what we call Havdalah, a blessing that distinguishes between Shabbat and the weekday. Now, in the blessing of Havdalah, we include a blessing on the wine, a blessing on the flame, a blessing on fragrant spices, bisamim, and then the blessing of the Havdalah itself, in which we thank God for separating between the days of Shabbat and the ordinary days of the week, and then we follow this by drinking wine. The Rav writes, this Mishnah now is discussing a specific situation. A person now was eating on Shabbat by mincha time, and it became dark, Shabbat ended, and he didn't finish his meal yet. He only has one cup. He wants to recite Birkat Mazon over the cup of wine, which is the best way to perform it. However, he also has to recite Havdalah, and he only has one cup of wine. Beit Shammai say the order that since you have only one cup, you have to perform the Havdalah and Birkat Mazon over the same cup of wine. So what is the order? Beit Shammai say first you bless on the candle, then you say Birkat Mazon, then you bless on the spices, and then you recite Havdalah. The Kule Alma Havdalah Basov, everyone agrees that Havdalah comes at the end, and everyone also agrees that the candle comes in the beginning. The reason for this is because we want Shabbat to end as late as possible. Therefore, we put Havdalah at the end. The machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is what comes first, the Birkat Mazon or the spices. Beit Shammai say you have to recite Birkat Mazon before the spices. Beit Hillel say you have to recite the blessing on the spices before Birkat Mazon. Why? Because Beit Shammai say, since the obligation of Birkat Mazon took effect as soon as the meal ended, and we don't have to say the blessing on the spices till we're about to smell them, Birkat Mazon comes first. Whereas Beit Hillel say you should have no interruption between reciting the blessing on the flame and the blessing on the spices. Therefore, blessing on the spices is said before Birkat Mazon so that it follows this flame immediately. So, to conclude, Rabotai, Beit Shammai say the order is candle, Birkat Mazon, spices, and Havdalah, because we want Birkat Mazon to come as soon as it has to come in. Beit Hillel say candle, bisamim, then Birkat Mazon, then Havdalah, because we want the bisamim to always follow the candle. Now, Rabotai, the reason we make the blessing on the flame first, according to both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, is because the Tosfot Yom Tov writes in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah, we benefit from the flame the moment it is brought into the room. Therefore, we have to make the blessing immediately. And like we said, Havdalah is last because we want to make Shabbat exit as late as possible. And therefore, the only machloket we have left is, do Bisamim come first or does Birkat Mazon come first? The Mishnah concludes regarding the text of the blessing of Borei Me'oresh over the fire. Beit Shammai say you recite Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Shebara Me'or Ha'esh, who created the illumination of the fire, who created, past tense. Whereas Beit Hillel say Borei Me'or Ha'esh, Hashem, blessed you Hashem, who creates the illuminations of fire, Me'oreh, plural. So Beit Hillel does present tense and plural fires, whereas Beit Shammai said bara, past tense, me'or ha'esh, the single fire. Now, according to Beit Shammai, we say bara past tense. Why? Because the blessing refers to the creation of fire, which took place in the past after the very first Shabbat. As if you look in the Gemara Masechet Berachot, Rashi explains on page 52b that the blessing of the candle is said on Motzei Shabbat because it was created the very first Motzei Shabbat. And the Beit Shammai says the reason we say in the singular form we say bara me'or ha'esh is because a flame only provides one light. According to Beit Hillel, however, you don't have to say bara because the form borei can also include past, and we use the plural of me'oreh because several colors can be seen in the flame, like red, white, a sort of bluish green color. And that is, Rabotai, how the Rav explains it. Because Beit Hillel say, Borei also includes past tense as well. Because if you look in the Torah, you'll see many times it says throughout Tanakh, Borei, and it's referring to the past tense as well, Rabotai. That is the end of Mishnah Hey. Now, Mishnah Vav is going to discuss, since we're already talking about the obligation of reciting the blessing over the spices, b'samim, for Havdalah, it's going to discuss which spices cannot be used when reciting Havdalah. The Mishnah says, En mevachin lo al-ner, v'lo al-b'samim shel ovdei kochavim. We may not recite the blessing use it on the flame or the spices of idol worshippers. Why? Because their flame, the Rav writes, is disqualified because they use it on Shabbat. Meaning they did melacha, it didn't rest. Melacha was done by its light. Therefore, it's disqualified. You're not allowed to use their spices because also their spices were used for idol worshipping purposes. Like the Rav writes, it's talking about spices that were used during the ceremony, during the banquet of the idol worshippers, since it was used for idols and the Torah prohibits any benefit that is gained from idols. The Mishnah continues, you're not allowed to recite the blessing over the flame and over the spices of a dead. A flame placed near a dead body is disqualified because it was not intended to provide light but honor, and we're only supposed to make the blessing over fire that's providing light. Spices placed near a dead body are not allowed to recite the blessing of Samim over it because they're not intended to give off a good smell but to cover the corpse's bad smell. And the Rav writes that you're only allowed to use a flame for Havdalah if it was meant to provide light, and spices are not fit unless they're used to provide a good smell, not mask a bad smell. And the Mishnah continues, you're not allowed to recite the blessing of the flame or the spices that were placed before an idol because it's forbidden to have benefit from something used for an idol. And the Mishnah concludes, we may not recite the blessing on the flame until benefit is received from its light. And the Rav writes, you have to benefit from the light. It doesn't have to be that you have to specifically be benefiting from the light. Rather, there's an option that you're close enough that if you wanted to benefit from the light, you had the ability to do so. The custom is, we say that the Tosfot Rosh brings down that we usually put our fingernails by the fire, by the candle, in order to distinguish between the nails and the surrounding skin. That is the end of Mishnah Vav and today's Mishna Yomi. Rabotai, Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.